Howdy quilters. Today, on this super hot Saturday, let's discuss really creative ways or better ways to use your scraps, your crumbs, and the other half of those HSTs everybody keeps asking you to save. Stay tuned. In this video, I'm going to discuss with you my own personal preferences for what I like to do with my scraps and crumbs. I don't pre-cut them. Like I said before in my other video, I sort them by color. I leave them until I see somebody's amazing video and I think, ooh, I gotta make one of those. Let me get out all my scraps and my crumbs and I'm gonna make one. The first thing I want to talk about is I have really not that many scraps, but as we know, 250 just happened, and so everybody's rushing to make patriotic quilts. Well, I went to my scrap bins, and I want to show you 3 different quilts that I made just using my scraps. And it is, like I keep telling everybody, there's so much yardage in your scrap bins that it feels like I probably could have made 2 or 3 more, and like not even, I would have had some left. I mean, and my bucket is, my Tupperware is only the size of like a small shoe Tupperware from, the Walmart. So I'm going to hand hold my camera and talk you through the different quilts that I made so that you can see that you can use your scraps. It doesn't have to be a hodgepodge that turns everything brown. Okay, I want to explain color theory just a second. Bear with me. When you put all the colors of the rainbow on a quilt, your eye is the master at blending, fading, filling in missing pieces. So when you put everything together, your eye, it does, maybe this is just my opinion, but it does have a tendency to just blend everything to brown. Put the orange and the green together, put the blue and the, well no, it's the green and the red, the orange and the blue, the purple and the yellow. You're getting brown. You're just mixing, your eye is mixing the colors. And so I think that's why sometimes those crumb quilts get a little bit muddy. But I'm gonna show you one that I made that I'm not happy with it. I mean, I only made 4 blocks and then I was like, I don't really like this. So I will show you that one too. But for probably the rest of the video, I'm going to be holding my camera and kind of zooming in close into some of these quilts so that you can understand what it is that I did. All right. So this is the oldest patriotic one I have. And as you can see, all these blues here are just all different fabrics. All the reds, they're all different fabrics. Some of them are Valentines, some of them are apples. There are some patriotic ones in here, but I'm getting to the end of those. But when I made this quilt, I had a few left. So you can see that how I broke down the block was I said all the star points needed to be blue. The centers were all going to be this scrap fabric I had of fireworks. And then for this block here, once again, all the star points would be blue scraps and all the corner, the 9 patches, would be red. And the centers of this one would be red. And so it doesn't really matter what red you use, because like they say, once you cut it small enough, you're not really going to tell that it was hearts for Valentine's Day. So if you look, that is just all scraps. So, and I actually had a flag, maybe I had a yard in order to do the edges. I didn't make it very big. But the whole center of the quilt itself is all from my scrap containers. I have started, which is how I know it's the older one, I have started free motioning it on my domestic sewing machine, and I'll get to those videos on how easy it is and what my process is.
I can't afford to take them to a long arm. It's just not cost prohibitive it's cost prohibitive for me. Some people can, or they can't free motion due to limitations. I totally get that, but I'm in the process of free motioning this one. So here's the next one. So I saw somebody make this really cool quilt design, and I said, oh, I got to try that block. Looks like it's going to be tricky, which I love tricky. So I went back to my scrap bins, and I had a leftover from, I'm pretty sure these were 5-inch squares, a lot of them, but I didn't happen to use these particular ones when I used oh gosh, what are the layer cakes? No, those are 10-inch. What are the 5-inch square bundles? I didn't end up using the blue and red in the actual, in the quilt that I made. And so there they were in my scrap container. And so I made this one out of my scraps. And then I used up some of the parts that they had us cut off in this pattern to make flying geese for the border, so that I could use up, once again, I could use up all of my, I could just use my scraps. I did have this particular Hawaiian pattern that I actually thought went with the red. The flowers, the center of the flowers go with the red that I had. And I really liked it. The blue and the reds go together. The deep blue and the red go together. So sometimes things go together that you don't think go together. And I got this at Goodwill, this Hawaiian fabric. So I don't think there's any of it left. I think I used it all for this. The quilt's, it's more of a decorative quilt. It's not that big. But I really wanted to try the block, and so that's why I ended up doing this one. Then, of course, 4th of July weekend came around, and I was like, I need to make another patriotic quilt. And so I actually had a stack of 5-inch blue squares. And the quality of the fabric was a little thinner than I like to use, but I was like, I'm just using it for my scraps. And so online there are probably, maybe, I don't know, maybe there's 50 different ways that you could make a quilt with half square triangles when you change up the way that you configure them. And so I just started playing around, and these are just the same scraps. You'll notice the same exact fabrics that are just left over from my bucket that I used to make this one. And I just made just tons of 2 at a time half square triangles, laid them all out on the floor, sewed the rows together, and created another quilt. And I could probably make, like I said, with my red bucket and my white bucket, I could make probably another quilt. So it doesn't, if you just stick to a few colors at a time with your scraps and your scrap pieces, you can make really stunning quilts out of all that scrap fabric. Okay, so I have a little bit of an obsession. I love to go on eBay when there's nothing else to do and search through quilt patterns. I think some people, their job is to find old quilt magazines, and they cut up the quilt patterns, like the pages, and they sell them for $1, $1.50, maybe 75 cents, well, whatever a stamp is now, 82, to mail it to you. And there's just a wealth of patterns from old magazines out there that are absolutely fabulous. So this is another example of scraps. And let me explain to you on this particular one what it is and why I think it's scraps. So I made a quilt for my mother. It was a huge king-size quilt, but the pattern called for a lot of half-square triangles, or triangles where it was a rectangle, and then you basically did a stitch and flip for the corner, and so I ended up with like tons of these little blue ones. What am I going to do with all those tiny little blue ones? Well, this particular pattern lent itself to that. But if you can see in this block, the white part of this block is actually multiple fabrics. I didn't have enough of one particular fabric in order to create, see if I can get over here and show you, in order to create all of those particular pieces with one type of fabric. And so what I do is I go through and I find 3 or 4 different fabrics that look almost exactly the same. Like you can't really tell when you step back 5, 6 feet. The eye, once again, that fabulous eyeball that we have, basically, blends it and says, oh, these are all the same. I had to do the same thing with the greens. I didn't have enough green to do all the green parts. So you'll see in here, I've got this one with the little X's, this one with the O's, this one over here with the curly Q's. I think there were three fabrics? 3 green fabrics that were close enough in value, in shade, that I said, you 3 all are going to replace this in this pattern. When the pattern called for, a yard and a half of one color, I said, well, you 3 are going to make up that, you're going to make that up. And so that's what you can do with your scraps, is if you find multiple ones that are close enough, then any pattern that you purchase, you can exchange it out for maybe 3 or 4 fabrics. Maybe this is not a revelation to people, but I don't see it happen very often, and so it is technically a scrappy quilt, even though I limited my palette to basically 3 colors, 3, 4, because I got this light gray to tie it all together, which I think I'm hopefully finally running out of this light gray color, because that seems like it's in every quilt. And most of these, like the tans in here that you see, these are all left over from the quilt that I made for my mom. And so I worked it into something else. Now I'm going to talk to you about the crumb quilt I don't like. I saw this pattern, and you're supposed to do like, I don't know, 6 across or 7 or 8 down. And you're supposed to use the adding machine tape for this. I just didn't like it once I put it together. It's too busy. There's not enough eye rest. Maybe if I had done the strips with maybe just 3 colors with no white in it, I would have liked it better. The white is kind of chopping up the strips. I also wouldn't have cut the strips at the exact size of the adding tape. Next time I would actually add a 1/4 inch to the side of the tape, because then it wouldn't be, it just doesn't do it for me. So I might cut these apart and, I don't know, use them in some other way. Maybe I'll turn them into half square triangles or something and use them in some other quilt. If I ever do, I'll post that. But I did take those strips and I added it to the bottom of another quilt that is a major crumb quilt that does use up a ton of your crumbs, and I'm going to show you that one next. So this is a crumb quilt, and it did use up a lot of crumbs. But from a distance, like my husband, he didn't even realize that every single one of those half square triangles was tiny little pieces. He just thought it was blue fabric. He was shocked when he came up on it and realized what it was. If you go on like Pinterest or somewhere else, there's, like I showed you for the Patriotic quilt, there are so many designs for half square triangles, and you can literally do them in any size. And so in this one, I did 10-inch squares, and they were 10-inch squares, and I cut them down, so I think they're down to they're not 9.5. Yeah, they are 9.5-inch squares before I sewed them together. So they're not, it's 9-inch squares. But once again, you'll probably see some of the stuff that was in the Patriotic quilt is also in this. I stayed with colorway so that I could control what the eye is doing when it's mixing color. And that's what I did. Now when I finished it, it needed something. And so I actually went back to my, and I'll show you, I don't want to go too fast so people get sick. This is the adding machine tape again. It does work as a very good stabilizer, but all I did was go to my scraps and I just did black, white, keyboard style and gray. And at first I was going to do it all the way around. But then with the direction of the way that the half square triangles go, it didn't lend itself to that. It really, this is the way that the quilt would sit. It has kind of a top and a bottom, and so I only ended up putting it on the top and the bottom, and I like it that way. I think it's actually, I think it works for its movement that way. So that is another, you know, it's another way. This is a huge way to use up your crumbs. If anybody wants me to demonstrate this, I have no problem doing that. As you'll see also, when I free motion quilt, I mark all my quilts before they actually become a sandwich. I love to draw, so to actually sit while I'm watching a TV show and take a stencil and either use the whole stencil, part of the stencil, I'll basically draw all the stuff that I'm going to free motion quilt on it, and then, you know, it'll wash away or iron away. For the actual crumbs themselves, because they are so busy, I would just do a very simple pattern to tack them down so that, you know, each batting will say on it how much distance you can have in between rows that it won't collapse on you. Usually it's 4 inches, like a 4x4 square. I'll probably do maybe something tighter, maybe like 2-inch by 2-inch, maybe grids on them or something. But they're already busy, so to add something busy on top of them would a little kind of be a little bit ridiculous. But to actually take gray thread and accentuate the gray part is a nice counterbalance to the actual crumb blocks themselves. Okay, this one is a true crumb leader ender quilt with all the little tiny half square triangles. So the way I started was I was making, you can see these right here, I would sew 2 together as a leader ender, and it had to be a dark and a light. So I started making these 16 patches. They're 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch squares, which is something that we get left with a lot. But then, after making my mom's quilt and some other quilts, I realized I have a lot of these 2.5 by 4.5 inch like white strips. But I had also tons of 2.5 by 2.5 inch, you know, like squares of all sorts of blue color. So I started working on this, and you can see this center one where these are tiny half square triangles that are cut-offs from all of those projects they tell you to save the other half of your half square triangle, and they're trimmed down to, they were unfinished, a 1.5 inch half square triangle, so they go down to 1 inch. This doesn't bother me because the blue becomes the predominant color. The 16 patches, they kind of recede a little bit, and the way you trick the eye with places to rest is by using the white, basically arrows, and then the framing, the border of this piece here. I originally was going to make a huge one of these, and then I was like, wow, that is just too much. That's just too busy. It's too crazy. And so you can see this is a work in progress. I have been probably working on this for 10 years. And just every once in a while, I grab it out, I make some more of the arrows. I have a little tray next to my table, and just sew more of the 16 patches, you know, when the mood hits me. Some of these crumb quilts, they're not going to be rushed. They're going to be using your stuff up over the years because you're going to keep adding to it and adding to it. Who knows how big this one will get. I have started getting more into leader ender quilts, so I'm being more thoughtful with my 1.5 inch little squares. And I'll show you another quilt that I'm working on for that at some other time. It's not with me, but this is another way that you can use up your scraps and your crumbs that does not muddy, does not become muddy when you actually put it all together. So here is more of my mother's leftover quilt. I ended up with so many tiny half square triangles from the opposite sides of the way the quilt block was, that I started sewing them together with some place for the eye to rest. And as you can see, I am nowhere near finished and not really locked into a design yet, but I wanted to show you that you can start piecing this stuff together. And these turn out to be 1 inch by, just basically 1 inch by 1 inch half square triangles. And I may put just a solid fabric in here so that I can do free motion quilting, so that it's not so much. You know, that old saying, less is more? Sometimes less is more. So it may be that at these corners here, when I make the last few, I'll only come out at each more corner. I'll fill the rest in with solid white or some other color, and I will just free motion quilt that. And it's a great way to use up your orphan blocks, but also be able to practice your free motion quilting. And I actually have a Valentine one that I made for a friend. I made the Valentine quilt for him, but then I ended up somehow with a bunch of leftover blocks, and so I actually did that for myself. I used the orphan blocks. I put a lot of negative space, which would be all this area in here, in just white, and I free motioned the whole thing. I'll show that to you guys sometime if you guys are interested, in my free motion videos. And you can see how we do that. And so then these guys become much more important, a lot less busy, and you can make them shine. So, you know, this is something you can do with your half square triangles, the little tiny ones. I wouldn't go smaller than the 1.5 inch. I have seen at the quilt shows, there's that lady that does the really tiny, tiny ones. I might actually go mad if I did that, but this is just another way that you can use this. And you could probably do this as a leader ender because they are so small and you want to use the least amount of thread in between the regular quilt blocks that you're making. And here is one of my most favorite scrap bin quilts. It is a pattern by Carol Phelan from the Four Oaks Retreat. If the pattern is still up, I'll try to link it down below in the comment section. It's really a beautiful pattern. I still have to put a border on it. It is a king size. It will be king size, so it'll be ready for my bed. But as you can see here, I limited my palette. Oranges, purples, gray, black, and white. And the way she built the pattern, it does look like there's arcs. It's all straight sewing. It's very beautiful. But this particular quilt literally came out of the orange, purple, white, black, and gray scrap buckets. I didn't add anything to it, and as you can see, I'll get down off this chair and kill myself. If you can see, some of these are just really strange they're strange patterns that you like, what are you going to use them for? But, you know, the smaller you cut them, the better they look. So you've got crows in there, and a lot of this stuff here was left over from charms. That's it, a charm pack. From a charm pack that I had of Halloween of a different half square triangle quilt I built with a Halloween charm pack, and that was the leftovers. So, you know, there's so much stuff that is left over that, you know, we could be using all this stuff. Oh, this is getting in my way. That you can see, look how much yardage there is here. It's a king size quilt out of my scrap buckets. I mean, that's just craziness. And I think people are scared of their scraps. They think, oh, I'll get to that, or I need to buy new stuff. The way I set up the blocks is, let me show you this corner one. I broke it into colors. All oranges have to go here, and all oranges have to go in these tri-recs here. And actually, I used Deb Tucker's tri-recs ruler, which is, her stuff is just amazing. I use that for building all these tri-recs, even though they kind of explain to you, as long as you know the finished size of the block, her tools will help you figure out what it is that you need. So she has a square and a square tool. She has a tri-rec tool, which is both sides of this are tri-rec. So everything on the outside is purple, and everything on the inside is orange. These are orange, but then the four square blocks in the corner, on the orange blocks, they're black. But if you come up here to the purple blocks, I use gray tones. And I change the direction they were going. Actually, that's part of the pattern. So this one is purple all on the outside, orange facing direction in with grays that go around, grays and blacks that go around here. And so when you do that with that beautiful human eye, see if I can go all the way across. When you go all the way across, I don't want to turn you too fast. I'm going to get back in the chair. Is that you get a really beautiful quilt with your scraps. So dig into those boxes. Halloween's coming soon. And start making some really cool stuff. Just start making, if you want, half square triangles with them. Use black on one side and all your purples, oranges, light grays, Halloween fabrics on the other side, and you can come up with so many designs. You could have really queen size, you could probably make a queen size quilt easy with all your stuff. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this today. It's a little bit of a trunk show, but for people to see that your scraps are a lot of yardage that costs a lot of money, these expensive quilt fabrics, you know, they get more expensive every day. So I hope you like this. Leave a comment below. I love interacting with people because I've been quilting pretty much by myself for years with, you know, nobody to chat with. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this. Keep cool. It's a super hot summer day, July 30th of 26. So have a nice tea for me. Talk to you soon. Bye.